Please turn to Chapter 2 in the New Client Handbook, Accounting Maintenance. And the first section in accounting maintenance is setting up your checking accounts. Well, in this exercise, we start with the assumption that you're a brand new UAN user and you need to, and you have no data entered in your software. The only thing you've done maybe is gone through what you'll see in the conversion manual. You've gone through and you checked your entity setup, your specific township, village, or library information. And you've gone through all of your conversion worksheets and materials, decided a conversion method, and now you're going to start by setting up a checking account. So the menu path is here under Accounting, Maintenance, Checking Accounts. So I'm going to need to log into the computer. I should say into the program. And so, again, my steps to access, the first time we've used that is right here, Accounting, Maintenance, Checking Accounts. So I go to my Accounting module, Accounting, Maintenance, and we'll be camping out a lot here. This is the Accounting Maintenance chapter, and we'll be camping out on this for quite a bit here. So we go to Accounting, Maintenance, and here are all of my options for my setup options. They're listed alphabetically, and so we can see C here under letter C, checking accounts. If I click on that, it opens up the checking accounts area. Well, only brand new UAN customers are going to see a screen that looks like this with nothing under checking accounts. Everyone else, if you're just a new fiscal officer and you're joining an entity that has UAN, or if you're a someone who's been working with this, you'll already have a checking account set up in the system, and at the very first checking account you have to set up is the primary checking account. So we'll click on the Add button, and it says a primary checking account does not currently exist. The primary checking account must be added before any secondary accounts can be saved. All right, well, what are we talking about with secondary checking accounts? Well, you can have, in UAN, you have one checking account, we call it the primary, in which all of your transactions, your increases and decreases in your cash balances occur. And that's your primary checking account. You might have 10 different funds as part of all of your cash, but whenever you post a payment or warrant, you have one checkbook in UAN. And that's, so you're going to have, if you have multiple checking accounts, you might consider, if legally possible, to consolidate some of those. If you have several checkbooks and you write checks regularly from those, your better option usually, unless there's some legal restriction, is to use one checking account. Now you might have other accounts opened, and maybe you use them for better interest rates or so forth. Well, those may or may not be categorized as secondary checking accounts. Maybe you would categorize those as investments, but you only have one primary account, and you only have one checkbook in UAN. If in the cases where you need a secondary checking account, and you do need to cut checks from that, you can create one of those, and there's a way around of recording the transactions, the increases and decreases in the secondary accounts, but it's not by producing a warrant in UAN. And we'll get to that in a later chapter. So here we just need to establish our checking account, the one we're going to be posting checks out of using UAN. And so click OK. And here's the, here we have the Add Checking Account form. And by default, it's going to name it the primary checking, or primary. That's just for internal use. You're not going to see that in a lot of like reports and forms. It's mainly so you can pick it from a list among if you have other checking accounts. So it's named primary. Here you, under account number, you would put in the account section under number, you would put in the actual account number at your bank. Well, we're going to put in something fake here, 1 through 7. So there you put in your actual bank account number, and then a meaningful description for that checking account. We're just going to put in something generic, primary checking account. All right, moving on to the next section under details. Well, it's going to select it for you. Since this is the first account code, it's got to be a primary, it cannot be a secondary checking account. And then we have this question here, interest bearing. And actually notice these will be throughout certain forms. If you click on them, it gives you some extra information. It's a little tip. If I click on that, it says, if this box is checked, this checking account will be available to choose as a receipt source when adding interest receipts. So that's very good information. Well, in most cases you have a checking account, it might earn a little bit of interest on that checking account. If you want it to show up, and again, it's kind of jumping ahead here, but this is setup. You want to be able to post interest to this checking account, you have to fill in this checkbox. You can always, if you make a mistake, you can always go back and edit this field, but remember it's and change it to interest bearing. But you must fill in that checkbox for it to be interest bearing. I'm going to skip to the bank section here. So we want to put in our bank name. Well, we got a very simple bank name. It's called local bank. And in real life, you'd want to fill in all the address information. In the interest of class time, we're going to skip that. Excuse me. But you would want to fill in your contact information, phone number. But it's not a required field. Notice again, remember from our welcome screencast, you saw that the highlighted fields, or in our case the green fields, are highlighted in green, and that means they're required before we save this. If I try to save this without filling in the name of the bank, I get an error message. This field is required. So I type in bank, and it will allow me to save this. Now notice the starting warrant number is not required, so I can save this, and it allows me to save the primary checking account. Remember, I skipped that from our exercise on page 10. All right, and here I can print a checking account report. Now I don't have my printer hooked up. Obviously, you don't need to see all that. You'll get, whenever you fill in a form, it's going to usually bring a system message saying, do you want to print a report? You can always print that information in some other report form. This is just, the reports usually on these system messages will only print the information that you've inputted on this particular form in this particular session. So be aware of that. If you're adding 2 different checking accounts and you add them one at a time and save them and come back and add them one at a time, it's only going to print that information of this on this one checking account, even though you might have 2 of them set up, or any other type of form. And these are very screen-specific, session-specific reports when they prompt you for them, for these types. So we're just going to select no for the purpose of class. Really, all throughout the class, we'll select no. We won't print those reports. And that closes the form. And now we can see in our list of checking accounts, in the checking accounts area, that we've got our primary checking account established. If, for instance, I need to make edits to that primary checking account, I can click on the checkbox and go to the Edit button. and make some changes. Maybe this shouldn't be interest-bearing, so I could change that and save it. I'll leave that the same. Now, in order for, before you post a check, which again, this is what jumping way ahead to transactions, but before you post a check, you need to establish a starting warrant number, and it needs to be established here in the checking account for your primary checking account. Depending on the conversion method that you're using in UEN, and this is again a whole different conversion booklet, but I'll just make a few notes for those of you who are converting. Depending on your conversion method, you may do this at different points in your conversion. If you're recording the detailed conversion, and again, this is only for those converting, you don't have to worry about this if you're in another situation, then you would establish the first warrant number as of January of the current year, the first warrant that was actually posted in real life. Say you're converting in June, and so you got to get all that information in if you're doing the detailed method. Then you would establish that number as of January, the first warrant that printed for that year. If it's a lump sum method, then you could come back later, and if you're converting as of June 1st and your first check is going to be June 1st or 2nd, you would change that number here, change it to the number as of June. So if you're using one of those two methods, that's the point in time you change this. But you have to establish a warrant number. You use this change button to establish it. You have a note here. Please note that the start warrant number may be changed a maximum of five times per year and may only be decreased. Well, it may only be decreased here. In other words, you can't increase it. If you need to increase the warrant number, then you would do that somewhere else. That would be when you're making a payment. You would skip your warrant numbers. So if you're confused by that, don't worry about it right now, but make a note about that it's maybe in your book or somewhere that you can only decrease it under the start warrant number here, and that there's a limit amount of times because it will allow you to have legitimate duplicate warrant numbers. And so anyways, I'm going to click OK on this, and it's very easy. You just type in your start number. We're going to say our warrant number is 1000, and you click on Save, and it saves it. So now that's my starting warrant number. If I come back here later, I can change it, but only a maximum of 5 times per year, and I should not increase it here. So if I click OK, I should not increase this to let's say 1010. If I have to increase it, it should be done in a different section when I record a payment. I can do it, and I'll show you that when we get to transactions. But I can decrease it. Maybe I estimated wrong. It should be 9,900 or something, when would be my first starting warrant number, depending on when we convert, whatever. So it can be changed here. You never delete your primary checking account. It never will be deleted. If you ever have to change banks, so if I go to local bank to and change banks to regional bank, I would not, there's no, well, there is a remove button. But if I try to remove this, it's going to give me an error message. The following items were not removed. The reason, it's the primary checking account. You cannot remove the primary checking account. You can make edits later on. So if I want to edit the bank name, I can do that. Notice something else about this. There's no cash. The balance is 0. And there's no way that I can enter a cash amount. I'm trying to type. Can't do that. You establish the cash balances. For those of you who are converting, you establish those when you add the funds. Then you establish the cash balance at that point. with because everything kind of is reflected in your fund balances. And so you need to establish your funds and then establish your fund cash balances for those of you who are converting. For the rest of you, you already have a primary checking balance comprised of your funds, and that balance would be displayed if you go to edit the screen here. Okay, I think I've hit all the points in the highlights in our book. One thing outside of the book here, for those of you converting, when you convert, you actually establish the primary checking account, and then you would establish your funds, your fund cash balances, and then if you have any secondary checking account, for instance, maybe for grant purposes, you have to have it in a separate account. You have to have a certain amount of money in a separate account. Well, after you have a fund you establish your funds and the cash balances, you could you would add your secondary checking account. You could name it secondary or name it grant. Just making up a number. Maybe it's interest bearing. And here you could establish a secondary checking account. Notice that you do not establish the secondary checking account balance at this time either. It's excuse me. I'm sorry. The secondary checking account balance is not established in this screen either. And because we have no cash balance period right now, we can't do that. But I kind of skipped through a message here. I shouldn't have. There was a message saying that you could open the checking transfer screen. And that's located here under transactions. So once you get a checking balance in your primary, you have the ability to transfer. I'm not going to let me do it because I don't have a cash balance. You have the ability to transfer money from your primary checking account to your secondary checking account and move money back and forth between those checking accounts. We'll talk about that. We have a section of that in Chapter 2 under Accounting Transactions. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of a preview there first. All right, so that's it for checking accounts. Our next section in Chapter 2 is funds and establishing our fund cash balances.